Incredible discovery. Cop exposes imposter agents for illegal entry, handing out 7-year sentences. Officer Jake Thompson didn't ask for this. He never imagined his commitment to law enforcement would lead him down such a dark path. The icy wind cut through his uniform as he stood outside the precinct, the weight of the badge pressing heavily on his chest. His grandfather once wore it with pride, safeguarding a town that felt like a family. But today, that legacy was a burden. Rumors were buzzing. Impersonators claiming to be ICE officials were swindling desperate families out of their savings, promising legal roofs over their heads. These whispers gnawed at him. Should he treat them as criminals or victims caught by a system that often turned a blind eye? Jake took a deep breath, grappling with a familiar tension. He felt the echoes of his ancestors, struggling for dignity in a world that didn't always accept them. Every report he read about the break-ins, every story he heard from their victims, unsettled him. He recalled his own family's trials, wondering if they would have faced the same injustice if they had been treated so harshly. Dread seeped into his gut. Was he upholding justice or fanning the flames of inequity? Before we continue, I need to tell you about something important that's happening. YouTube has been making changes to the system, and many people are losing notifications from channels they follow. If you're enjoying the content, click the bell and mark all notifications so you don't miss the next videos. And if you can leave a like, it really helps with reach. Seriously, it makes a difference. Oh, tell me in the comments where you're watching from. I'm always curious to know who's on the other side of the screen. Now let's continue. Each face he encountered told the same story of fear and betrayal. A mother clutching her child, a father with sorrow in his eyes, all of them victims of deceit masked in uniform. Jake's heart clenched as he recorded each incident, the mounting evidence almost too overwhelming to digest. The images haunted his dreams. The feeling that he was standing at a precipice filled him with dread. His mind raced with questions. Who were these imposters? What happened to their families? With every piece of information he gathered, he felt a tightening grip around his conscience. His superiors pressed harder to focus on traditional law enforcement, and even they appeared reluctant to dig deeper into the allegations. Their apathy gnawed at him. Had the system grown so cold in its pursuit of regulation that it sidelined the very humanity it was meant to protect? Shouldn't he be the one to ensure justice wasn't a mere tool of the powerful? But every moment spent unraveling this web put him in danger. He could see the implications of his actions stretching like dark shadows over his career. Corruption loomed closer, and the stakes rose. He began to sense the eyes of people who benefited from the chaos watching him. With every arrest, the weight of that choice pressed against him like a vice grip. Was it worth risking everything to stand against both the criminals and a system that might not want to hear what he had to say? The depth of the conspiracy bore down on him, and he was teetering on the edge, wrestling with an agonizing dilemma. The truth was buried deep, intertwined with his own family's history. And as he clutched the evidence, a chilling realization gripped him tight. Could he expose them without shattering the delicate balance of trust in his community? He could feel the ground shifting beneath his feet, and a palpable sense of dread gripped him. The darkness whispered questions he was too afraid to answer. How much longer could he walk this line? Would he find the power within himself to bring justice to those who needed it most? Or would he simply become another pawn in the game? Jake spent sleepless nights diving deeper into the case, his mind racing with the complexities of moral and ethical responsibility. Each call he received from distressed families weighed on him like an anchor dragging through murky waters. He often replayed their conversations, analyzing where the lies ended and their vulnerability began. He witnessed their desperation morph into anger, and it gnawed at his conscience. During the day, the precinct felt stifling. Too many officers assigned to mundane tasks, blinded by bureaucracy and protocol. Why were the powers that be ignoring a crisis unfolding at their feet? On one particular morning, Jake found himself pacing outside the break room, contemplating the risk of stepping out of line. Could he turn his observations into an actionable plan? His gut twisted at the thought of pursuing this path without assurance of support. Determined to separate himself from the stagnant morale among his colleagues, Jake wanted to expand his network. He reached out to local organizations that advocated for immigrants' rights, hoping to gain intelligence that could lead him closer to the imposters. His inquiries were met with skepticism, yet respect grew as he demonstrated genuine concern. It was liberating to speak candidly with those who knew the nuances of fear and injustice. Each new contact reinforced Jake's commitment to his cause, urging him to cast aside hesitations. Despite his growing network, Jake felt isolation gnawing at him. One night, outside a small gathering organized by an advocacy group, he met a young woman named Rosa. She was passionate and bright, a survivor of her own battles who had narrowly escaped the clutches of the deceitful agents he sought. She shared her heartbreaking experience, her eyes fierce with determination as she recounted resilience amid chaos. Rosa's narrative sparked something deep within Jake, igniting a flame that pushed past his doubts. Realizing the personal stakes involved, he grasped the breadth of his own potential. Courage rippled beneath his skin, a call to action demanding to be answered. Through nights spent with Rosa and a small team of advocates, he unearthed a vital lead, a name associated with the impersonators. This connection sent a jolt through him, shattering the silence of his apprehensions. He couldn't ignore it. He had to pursue it further, armed with the knowledge that if even one family could find justice, it was worth the risk. However, this revelation was a double-edged sword. Each layer he peeled back revealed not only the perpetrators, but the institutional barriers that shielded them. Would uncovering this information fortify his purpose, or sink him into deeper danger? His internal compass spun, fueling both excitement and trepidation. Time was ticking, and every moment he lingered in contemplation cost him an opportunity to make a difference. Standing at a crossroads, Jake took a decisive moment to record everything he had learned. With this evidence in his hand, he would confront the higher-ups once again. But second-guessing himself, the fear of backlash gnawed at him. Was he prepared for their inevitable disbelief? The stakes had grown impossibly high. As he drove home that night, the glow of headlights illuminated opportunities and threats that blurred before his eyes. Awareness loomed larger than before. He could feel the invisible strings tightening around him, ready to tether him to his choices. Decision time had arrived, and he needed to face the truth head-on. The familiar comfort of routine had deserted him, leaving only the weight of uncertainty behind. But within that uncertainty lay a simple truth. If he wanted to change the narrative, it was time to step into the light. Jake pressed his foot firmly against the accelerator, determination coursing through him. The next day would bring clarity. It was time to raid the shadows where corruption thrived and confront the truth. But would he be ready to handle the repercussions? With resolution solidifying, he knew he was on the brink of a confrontation that could redefine not only his career, but his very understanding of justice itself. The stakes were real, and the moment of reckoning was fast approaching. The sun rose in a haze, dimming the weight of the night but failing to lift the heaviness that hung over Jake's chest. A fusion of anxiety and excitement pulsed within him as he approached the precinct, each step heavier than the last. He needed resolve, clarity, courage, yet uncertainty wrapped around him like a fog, compelling him to rethink every aspect of his plan. Sitting at his desk, the familiar bustle around him felt further away than ever. He rifled through the notes he had compiled, eyeing the names that had begun to weave a narrative far too intricate for his comfort. With every encounter he'd had, Jake discovered not just victims of the imposters but structural failures within the very institutions that were supposed to protect them. This understanding paralyzed him momentarily, erasing rational thought as he wrestled with the implications of what he knew. His colleagues continued their routine, oblivious to the storm brewing within him. Their laughter, their mundane conversations about case dismissals and paperwork, irritated him. How could they remain blind to the suffering outside their walls? But deep down, jealousy sparked. They too were shielded from the burdens he bore. It was an intoxicating thought, that perhaps ignorance was a form of peace. But he wasn't seeking peace. He sought justice, however elusive. Jake closed his eyes, willing himself to be brave. His resolve solidified when he thought of Rosa, and the countless families stifled under the weight of exploitation. Would their suffering be in vain if he allowed the fear of his superiors to keep him silent? A plan began to crystallize. Each detail mattered down to how he would present his findings without being dismissed as an overzealous cop out of his depth. He gathered evidence meticulously, arranging data and testimonials to create a compelling narrative. His heart raced as he envisioned walking into the captain's office, armed not only with evidence but with the passion of those whose stories he had collected. With his heart beating furiously, he finally approached the captain's office just before noon, the tangible tremor of adrenaline boosting his inputs. He opened the door, announcing his presence, even with shaking hands. The captain, seated behind a piled desk, looked up with raised brows. Jake steadied his breaths before speaking, leaning forward slightly. "Captain, I have urgent information regarding the impersonators operating in our district." He thrust the folder onto the desk, the papers spilling out like confetti. A chaotic display of every individual he had connected with, each story meticulously documented. The captain's face shifted from curiosity to annoyance. "Jake, if this is about your latest rabbit hole, you need to get back to real police work." Ignoring the dismissal, Jake pressed on. He outlined the connections he had uncovered, the systemic failures, and most importantly, the urgency of taking action before more families fell prey. As he spoke, the captain's attention locked onto him, skepticism ebbing just a fraction. But when he laid out the network, the one identification that bifurcated him from mere speculation to undeniable evidence, he sensed a shift in the atmosphere. This was no longer just about his internal moral compass. It was about cold, hard facts laid out on the table. "Jake," the captain finally interjected, his tone a mixture of wariness and grudging respect. "This is quite the accusation. Are you prepared for the fallout of this?" The question dug into Jake's core, surfacing the fears he had tried to stifle. Could he endure the repercussions? Would he jeopardize his career? Or worse, the lives of those he aimed to protect? But at that moment, the faces of the families burned brightly in his memory, overpowering all hesitations. "Yes," he replied firmly, a conviction unfurling, igniting a flame of defiance. "I'm ready to confront whatever comes next." The captain nodded, his eyes narrowing as he assessed the situation. "Then let's get to work." But just as the sparks of collaboration began to ignite, a text buzzed on Jake's phone. His heart sank as he glimpsed the words on the screen, a warning that sent shivers down his spine. "They're onto you." As the weight of those words settled in, Jake understood that the moment of truth was at hand, and he needed to prepare for whatever storm lay ahead. Would he be able to navigate this treacherous path, or would the shadowy forces he sought to unmask claim him instead? The fight had begun, and every heartbeat echoed the urgency of the choices he had to make. The tension in Jake's chest morphed into a hot, stifling weight as he stared down at his phone. The message loomed larger than life, demanding his immediate attention, and conjuring fears he had fought to suppress. He couldn't afford the slightest hint of vulnerability. Not now. Not when he was finally gaining traction. Drawing a deep breath, he turned his focus back to the captain, whose eyes now brimmed with cautious interest. "Let's discuss our next steps," Jake said, his voice steadier than he felt. He couldn't let the warning hover in his thoughts. Action was imperative. The faces of the victims swirled in his mind, fueling his determination. The captain leaned back and steepled his fingers, examining Jake with a new intensity. "If they're onto you, this isn't just an investigation anymore. It's a risk analysis." He paused, allowing the gravity of his words to sink in. "We need a strategy to protect you and the integrity of this operation." Jake processed the captain's words, feeling the weight of responsibility press against him. What had begun as a crusade for justice was rapidly evolving into a precarious balancing act, teetering between exposing the truth and safeguarding his own future. "Agreed," Jake said, controlling his voice to sound resolute. "We need to tighten security. If they can identify me, they're likely already tracking my every move. I'll need to lay low while we gather more information." The captain nodded slowly. We can set up a secure communications line and redirect your regular checks. I'll put a few others on the case to lend support, but I can't promise the entire precinct will be on board. Some will scoff at this whole venture." With that, Jake's mind raced. Doubt threaded into his thoughts, whispering that he might be in over his head. But the specter of the people he aimed to protect anchored him, stifling any wavering instincts. He couldn't lose sight of the bigger picture. This wasn't just a job anymore. This was about breaking down a system built on deception. The captain leaned closer, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial tone. "We need something concrete to hit back with. You'll need to go deeper, inspect their connections, find out who orchestrates these impersonations, who benefits. What's our time frame?" Jake's urgency spoke volumes, emboldened by his drive to uncover the truth. "The sooner the better. But don't rush blindly. We can't afford a misstep. Not with these players," the captain replied. Jake nodded in agreement, his gaze focused and determined. As they strategized, he felt an exhilarating rush of clarity. This was not just a professional challenge, but a deeply personal mission, intertwining his values with each decision he made. After their meeting adjourned, Jake returned to his desk, a singular objective coalescing in his mind. Dare he confront the shadows lurking behind the imposter network? He couldn't ignore the gnawing worry that the threat to him might not only stem from above, but could also infiltrate the very core of those he worked alongside. It wasn't just the imposters at stake anymore. It was his credibility, his safety, and ultimately, his purpose. As he began to draft questions that could lead him deeper down the rabbit hole, the weight of the earlier text suddenly felt suffocating. He had to confront not only the criminals, but also his inner doubts. Taking a moment to gather his thoughts, he realized he had to develop an alertness beyond the desk work. He needed to be vigilant, observing how co-workers behaved, who was elusive and secretive. Suddenly, the knowledge blossomed within him. His role wasn't just to unveil these imposters, but also to identify allyships among his own colleagues. This dual responsibility stirred an unknown excitement. Clarity emerged alongside urgency. Jake needed to navigate this world with the utmost caution, but the real battle would be highlighting the truth while maintaining his cover. He would infiltrate the very fabric of deception, unraveling a web woven tightly around him. The next few days would be critical. As he opened the folder of evidence once more, he thought about how far he might have to push himself. Would he become the target of his own relentless pursuit? But as dread loomed, a spark of determination ignited within. He couldn't shy away now. This was about control. His control over a system attempting to silence him. He picked up his phone to send a reply to the anonymous warning, crafting a message that would buy him time and mislead. No longer would he just react. He would anticipate their moves as they tried to predict his. In this dangerous game of cat and mouse, only one could come out alive. But lurking in the shadows was an unsettling question that had no clear answer. What would happen when he finally faced the underbelly of this network, and those who lurked among the precinct he thought he knew so well? The days that followed were a whirlwind of activity as Jake balanced his work at the precinct with the newfound urgency of his investigation. Every moment spent processing cases felt taut, like a drawn bowstring, ready to snap with the slightest provocation. Aliases, connections, patterns, they cluttered his mind as he became increasingly consumed by proximity to deception. His evenings were spent sifting through evidence, piecing together jigsaw puzzles of misrepresentation and illicit gain. Each report painted a shadowy portrait of those involved in the network. As he read deeper into the findings, an unsettling realization emerged. The potential for betrayal was omnipresent. The sense of isolation began to take hold, gradually seeping into Jake's psyche. He couldn't share his workload, couldn't allow anyone to glimpse the cracks in his armor. The thin wall he erected between himself and his colleagues, meant to shield him, created a different kind of prison. With every passing hour, the question of trust gnawed at him. As he examined one particular file, a name caught his eye. Tommy Grayson, a low-level officer whose presence on the force seemed incongruous with the idealistic picture he had painted of his colleagues. Jake remembered their past interactions, grinning camaraderie in break rooms, shared jokes during mundane tasks, but something about Grayson felt off now. The louder Jake's instincts screamed, the more Jake's moral compass shifted, his desire for truth clouded by paranoia. In an attempt at strategizing, Jake devised a meticulous plan. He would approach Grayson to scope out any potential insights he might have without revealing his true intentions. It was a calculated risk, but Jake understood that in his closely knit world of law enforcement, sometimes the most suspicious characters wore friendly faces. The next day, Jake chose a quiet moment to corner Grayson by the coffee machine, masking his tension with forced nonchalance. "Hey, you heard about those impersonation cases?" he asked, feigning curiosity. "Yeah, crazy stuff, right?" Grayson leaned casually against the counter, but Jake caught the flicker in his eyes. Was it fear or something more? People just stirring the pot, trying to frame others. You know how it is. Jake pressed further, gauging the man's reactions. It was difficult to discern if Grayson was playing along or if he really held knowledge he didn't want to part with. "Do you think it goes deeper, like someone orchestrating it all?" Grayson's bravado slipped slightly, revealing unease beneath the surface. "Could be. You know, there's a lot of loose ends in the department, things that just don't add up. Best to keep your head down while you can." Jake nodded, hiding the undercurrent of suspicion that surged within him. He could feel the tension bubbling beneath the surface of Grayson's words. The officer had mentioned nothing specific, but the implication was clear. Something was amiss. The conversation gave Jake pause. He sensed that he was wading into treacherous waters. Every interaction could potentially reveal a breadcrumb leading to the truth, or bury him further in deception. Later that night, Jake sat in his dimly lit apartment, his mind racing with possibilities and the weight of his discoveries pressing upon him. He found it maddeningly exhilarating and utterly confounding. In the silence, he questioned everything. The motives around him, the underlying connections, and even the strength of his convictions. Doubt filled the void, creeping in as he scoured his notes from the past few days. Would he be able to outmaneuver the very people he once considered allies? Or was he playing a dangerous game that would end in his exposure? Jake resolved to dig further into Grayson's background, hungry for clues, yet aware of the stakes. He couldn't afford a misstep. His personal values collided with the realities of deception within his ranks, each problem heavier than the last. The pieces of his investigation now began to form a grotesque mosaic, a network intertwining deception, credibility, and danger. The next move was critical. He needed to adapt quickly and broaden his focus on others around him. Just when he believed he had grounded himself in certainty, the lurking fear began to settle again. What if he wasn't just surrounded by deception, but also standing within the very heart of the criminal network? The next morning, the sun filtered through Jake's apartment window, casting sharp beams of light across the scattered papers strewn about his dining table. The remnants of late-night research still clung to him, a haphazard assembly of notes, highlighted reports, and documents containing the names of officers who had stared back at him from the precinct, each seemingly innocent, now laced with suspicion. He felt the familiar thrill of pursuit. This was his arena. Today was pivotal. Jake chose to make a list, an outward map of the inner labyrinth forming in his mind. Each name represented a thread in the tapestry of deception, and each word carried the weight of trust, betrayal, or a dangerous form of ignorance. As he wrote down Grayson's name at the top, he realized it signified more than a mere suspect. It embodied the turmoil twisting deep within him. Could Grayson be the key to unlocking this mystery? Or was he merely another layer of complexity? The thought of approaching others filled him with both excitement and dread. He needed allies, yet how could he discern friends from foes? Jake made his way to the precinct, his resolve hardening with each step. He passed his colleagues, the banal chatter of morning greetings ringing hollow against his heightened awareness. It was unsettling to feel so detached in a place that used to feel like home. The laughter of fellow officers felt like an unsung symphony, harmonious yet fractured by the undercurrents of suspicion. Sitting at his desk, he decided to employ a different tactic. He would begin by observing the casual interactions around him. Was there a flicker of guilt in someone's gaze? a hesitance and a handshake. Jake needed to understand the nuances of behavior. He was no longer just another officer. He was a hunter in a world steeped in riddles. Throughout the day, Jake absorbed the environment into which he had so willingly immersed himself. He watched Grayson closely, noting how the officer's bravado thinly veiled a deeper uncertainty. The casual way he laughed felt inconsistent compared to the edge of his eyes. Were they devoid of the trust they once held? Later that afternoon, an unexpected lead emerged. A department meeting was scheduled, a perfect opportunity to survey and collate observations in one setting. As he took his seat among a circle of stoic faces, he steeled himself for a blend of superficial discussions and hidden tensions. During the meeting, his focus shifted to only half listening to the chief's updates on departmental policy. Instead, he carefully noted how his colleagues interacted. For every nod of agreement, Jake recorded a sepulchral silence lingering longer than it should. The innocuous smile exchanged between officers he once trusted felt more like a rehearsed performance, each gesture hiding potentially damning secrets. As the meeting progressed, something snapped inside Jake, a personal realization. The boundaries of his investigation had blurred the line between duty and paranoia. He was becoming an agent of suspicion, scrutinizing everything without a clear destination. The meeting ended, and Jake sat back in his chair, feeling the full weight of the internal conflict he faced. To pursue the truth meant walking a thin line that could cost him his career, and possibly his standing among his comrades. What if he diverted too far and became the very thing he distrusted? The thought hung in the air, a bitter pill that he couldn't quite swallow. Jake needed to confront Grayson again, but this time he would employ strategy, no longer seeking vague insights but disarming the officer to see how far he could push their dynamics. He could force Grayson to reveal something hidden within his guarded demeanor. There was a thrill in this new approach, a reckless determination coursing through Jake's veins as he pictured the encounter. It would force the truth, but he also carried the nagging realization that it could unravel everything. Taking a deep breath, he left the meeting room ready to feast on the morsels of information that lingered between them. The stakes were rising, and now only one question echoed relentlessly in his mind. How much longer until the truth unearthed something unexpected? Something that would change the course of his investigation forever? The precinct buzzed as Jake navigated the bustling corridors, the air thick with repressed laughter and bustling energy, the kind that felt foreign now, like a symphony playing an unsettling tune. He could see Grayson in the distance, hunched over his desk, surrounded by the aura of mundane efficiency that typically cloaked officers in the precinct. Today, however, Jake saw through that veil. Today he envisioned a carefully orchestrated confrontation that would peel back layers of grime caked onto the trust they once held. Jake's heart raced as he approached, each step precipitating a surge of adrenaline. They had shared years of camaraderie, a bond founded on mutual respect for duty. Now that bond felt like a chain tethering him to doubt. The exhilaration of the chase propelled him forward, despite deep-seated reservations tightening around his gut. "Grayson," Jake began, his voice low but firm, a calculated softness that could suggest vulnerability, exposing intentions without entirely relinquishing strength. The officer looked up, and Jake detected an initial flash of surprise that morphed into something more guarded. "Jake, what's up?" "I wanted to check in. You seem different lately. Is everything okay?" The question emerged almost instinctively. He had rehearsed so many variations of it in his mind, but now it felt almost too simplistic. Grayson shifted in his chair, caught off guard by the directness. "I'm fine, just, you know how it is. Busy." The answer, however, lacked the veracity of friendship. There was an edge in his voice that resonated like an alarm bell. Jake's instincts screamed for him to probe deeper. "Busy, sure. But with everything going on, I said I'm fine," Grayson snapped back, the veneer slipping, revealing a glimpse of the tension buried beneath. Jake inhaled slowly, gauging this reflective moment with both frustration and curiosity. Could it be Grayson was hiding more than fatigue? The officer's behaviors offered a puzzle, each piece fitting oddly in a distorted portrayal of loyalty and integrity, Look, I know things aren't easy right now. The department feels different, Jake pressed, his tone lighter but unwavering. But we're still in this together. The words felt precarious, a balancing act between solidarity and suspicion. Grayson's expression flickered, apprehension painting over his features like a cloud. Together. I don't know what that means anymore, Jake. The walls enclosed tighter around them. Jake had to lean in to forcibly unravel the bond they had shared without tipping the scales too far. Meaning what? Is there something between us that's shifted? If you know something, you need to tell me. The urgency stammered within him, pushing opinions of friendship to the periphery of this ruthless pursuit. For a moment, Grayson faltered, uncertainty reflected in his eyes. An unspoken tension radiated between them, the weight of hidden truths urging for release. Jake felt as if the balance of power tipped perilously close to the edge, and he was entranced by the gravity of what could unravel. But it was not enough. Grayson regained his composure and forced a chuckle, far too hollow for comfort. You're imagining things, man. We're fine. Jake's stomach turned. The instinct to push harder pulsated through him. It was not merely about gathering intel anymore. It became personal. There was a curiosity thrumming at the back of his mind, urging him to explore the depths of this interaction. What lay beneath Grayson's surface could either damn or vindicate them all. He stepped back, contemplating his options. Going in too heavy might send Grayson perpetually retreating into defensive silence. He had to rethink his approach. I overheard some things in the meeting today. It feels like secrets are breeding, and not just on your end. This wasn't just an assertion but a calculated nudge. Could it persuade Grayson to reveal his motives? Would it entice him to betray the secrets he clung to? The office filled with muted voices and the rhythm of typewriters, but all Jake could hear was the heavy silence hanging between them. Grayson's hesitance lay right on the cusp of confession, waiting for the right spark to ignite. As Jake approached the threshold of vulnerability, he sensed the stakes rising, not just in the investigation but in the remnants of their friendship that hung in the balance. With determination, he prepared to dive deeper, relying now on instinct, strategy, and the hope of unearthing the truth. And then, at that moment, a familiar voice boomed across the precinct, shattering the fragile tension. I hope everyone's ready for the next round in this investigation. We're about to delve deep. Jake's breath caught in his throat as his gaze snapped to Grayson, who wore a mask of unease. There was an answer hidden in that unease, and he knew now better than ever that the path ahead would lead them somewhere neither had anticipated. Who would emerge on the other side intact? Jake's heart raced as adrenaline twisted and churned within him. The sudden announcement echoed off the walls, punctuating the tenuous moment between him and Grayson. The undertones of that declaration sent tremors through the precinct, knitting together a complex tapestry of fear and uncertainty. The impending investigation loomed large over them all, and Jake's mind skittered through possibilities, the implications of coming revelations, the choices ahead, and the fragility of trust. He pushed away from Grayson's desk, his eyes darting around the precinct. Colleagues buzzed with anticipation of what was to come. Was this the moment everything would change? Not just within the department, but for him personally? Each officer intermingling with low voices shared whispers, their expressions betraying a spectrum of emotions from excitement to dread. He realized that the investigation soon to unfold could be a double-edged sword, capable of vindication or devastation. Jake? Grayson's voice cut through the swirl of thoughts, steady yet uncertain, drawing him back to the present. You need to be careful. This is bigger than you think. The warning hung heavy in the air, its weight amplified by the urgency in Grayson's tone. Jake felt an unsettling mix of defiance and understanding settle in his chest. He had been warned before, but familiarity could breed complacency, a risk he could no longer afford. I can handle myself, Jake replied, maintaining an even tone that betrayed none of his inner turmoil. This was his moment to rise, to tackle whatever plagued them both. You know I won't stand back this time, not with everything at stake. Grayson's eyes softened for an instant, revealing a flicker of camaraderie buried beneath layers of tension. I just don't want you to make a mistake that could cost you. Or us. Jake squelched the urge to retort, forcing down frustration. If you're holding something back, you need to come clean. We can't afford secrets, not anymore. Grayson hesitated, his gaze darting across the precinct as if seeking an escape. That lingering tension hinted at an unexplored narrative, an issue deeper and darker than procedural discrepancies. Jake's determination hardened. Whatever sadness clouded Grayson's eyes, it wouldn't keep him from pursuing the truth. This investigation was a catalyst for both their futures. Ultimately, he made a decision that could alter the course of their relationship. I'll find out what's really going on, he vowed. I don't need to wait for the brass to hand me orders. Defiance surged within him alongside a flicker of fresh resolve. Grayson regarded him carefully as if weighing the gravity of Jake's determination. Just don't get reckless, he warned softly. Sometimes the truth takes a toll. Then we'll take that toll together, Jake shot back, feeling the strength of their shared history glimmer below the surface. This was no longer just about an investigation. It was about friendship, loyalty, and retribution against shadows that threatened to devour them both. The clattering of chairs and the darting of flashes from laptops punctuated the air, gradually shifting the focus of the officers scattered throughout the precinct as the briefings began. Jake's senses sharpened. It was time to reaffirm his purpose and harness this turmoil for something greater. He committed to action with a plan uncoiling in his mind. He would amplify the connections he had, brush shoulders with those hidden in their own fears and prejudices, clinic visits in the field slowly feeding intelligence. Those individuals could possess untapped truths waiting just below the surface, and yet, despite that newfound determination, doubt lingered. What if digging deeper revealed unforeseen consequences? What if the truth he sought to unearth ended up fracturing the already delicate camaraderie they had fought to establish? As the briefing commenced, Jake felt the raw undercurrent of unresolved tension wrap around him. The insistent urgency pushed him to act, to uncover not only the truths hidden in their cases, but the deeper truths within himself as well. Just then, amid the structure of official procedures, a single name stirred up Jake's resolve, a name echoing with insidious whispers of treachery. The mere mention of it sent ice through his veins. He didn't just have a case, he had a target. The words formed a decision in his mind, a clear path to follow, and as he prepared to move forward, he sensed that something monumental was about to break. The currents beneath the precinct surged with energy, an unseen battleground set to surface. With resolve, he bolted upright, eyes scanning the room, determined to seize what lay ahead. Confrontation, exposure, and the promise of unyielding loyalty. His thoughts raced, and as he fixed his gaze on Grayson, the question formed in the depths of his mind. Would he recognize the risks posed by their own fractures? As he stepped into the fray, Jake couldn't shake the feeling that this was the precipice before a storm. The uncharted territory promised revelations that would stretch beyond the scope of police work. The time had come to face whatever shadows loomed in the precinct and discover the truths binding them all. The briefing room hummed with the murmurs of anxious officers, a sea of uncertainty punctuated by occasional clinks of coffee cups and rustling paperwork. Jake stood at the periphery, feeling the weight of expectation press down on him like a heavy cloak. The name that had ignited his resolve still echoed in his mind, drawing him further into the vortex of the department's secrets. Each day in that precinct had shaped him, filling him with experiences that ranged from the mundane to the harrowing. Today, however, he sensed that every past decision, every small victory and failure, led him here, to the cusp of unraveling something monumental. Yet, the specter of doubt loomed near. Would the truths he uncovered slide through his fingers like sand, further entrenching him in a spiral of consequences? Listen up. The commanding voice of the lieutenant shattered his thoughts, compelling quiet to fall over the room. Jake straightened, focusing intently as the lieutenant outlined the objectives of the upcoming investigation. A vague description sufficed, but each word struck deep chords within him. This wasn't merely an opportunity to advance his career. It was a crucible that would test every fragment of his resolve, every ounce of integrity he had cultivated. As the details unfolded, Jake's mind raced with reconnaissance strategies. His instincts screamed for him to gather intel from those who had braved the underbelly of this operation. He had forged bonds with informants, navigated the treacherous waters of their trust, and now those same connections would be instrumental. However, he knew that there was a fine line between courage and recklessness, a line he had already tested too many times. The briefing ended, and as officers dispersed to their tasks, Jake seized the moment to approach Grayson. He could sense the unspoken tension lingering like a fog. "What did you mean earlier about the stakes?" Jake pressed, his voice low yet insistent. Grayson rubbed the back of his neck, shifting uncomfortably. "It's about more than just us, Jake. It's about the system. You dig too deep, and we risk exposing the rot that runs through more than just our department." "What does that mean exactly?" Jake's gaze was unyielding. He needed clarity as he traversed this labyrinth of secrets. Grayson hesitated. "Think about it. Who stands to gain from keeping these investigations under wraps? There are people whose lives depend on silence. Silence we might disrupt," he warned. A cold knot formed in Jake's gut as the ramifications settled in. Delving into the unknown could unearth not only misconduct, but corruption that may extend beyond their precinct. The concept of hidden allies or enemies in their ranks paralyzed him for a fleeting moment. What if it was someone close? The thought escaped before he could seal it shut. Grayson met his eyes, and an unspoken acknowledgement passed between them. "Then we'll have to prepare ourselves." Grayson's response came laden with gravity, as if they had both stepped over a threshold they could never return from. Jake felt the pulse of determination amplify his heartbeat as he formulated a plan, ready to break into the murky depths of their investigatory threads. The tasks ahead, though daunting, ignited his passion. He wasn't just looking for answers anymore. He was ready to assert himself as a catalyst for change, forging a path through the darkness of uncertainty. As the hours dragged on and familiar faces flickered past him, collaborative yet strangely distant, Jake leaned into his resolve. Decisions would need to be made that day, choices that would define his character. He could no longer be an observer or a victim of circumstance. He had to initiate. His determination crystallized. The investigations wouldn't merely reveal evidence. They would expose lies and elicit truths that could reforge their very identities. With that knowledge, he began to weave a narrative in his mind, strategizing how to approach informants, cobbling together insinuations that could lead to revelations about their target. But as he glanced at Grayson, who remained entwined in his own thoughts, Jake couldn't shake the unsettling notion that some shadows may never be wholly illuminated. With a renewed commitment, he grabbed his jacket and strode purposefully toward the exit. Each step echoed the growing urgency within him as he stepped out of the precinct into the world that was both familiar and fraught with potential danger. The chase for truth was on, but as thoughts raced, a lingering question posed itself. Would he be prepared for what lurked behind the truths he sought? Truths that could reshape everything he knew. Just as he hit the door, a name flashed across his mind, a name he'd be gravely remiss to forget. But what exactly did that name signify in the grand tapestry unraveling ahead? In the quiet intensity of the precinct, Jake Thompson stood at the precipice of a defining moment. Determination coursed through him, solidifying into a fierce resolve. The chaotic swirl of the past months, rumors, doubts, betrayals, had crystallized into a singular purpose: to expose the imposters exploiting the vulnerable, and in doing so, reclaim his sense of justice and integrity. He had previously teetered on the edge of indecision, but today's urgency pressed him forward. He would not allow fear to suffocate his convictions. Each decision and every encounter he had navigated built a resilience within him, igniting a fire that refused to be quelled. The time had come for action, no more hesitating in the shadows. Guided by the investigative foundation he had laid, Jake assembled his resources. The bonds he'd forged with advocacy groups, the testimonies of victims, and a network of informants eager for justice. He could feel newfound strength proliferating within him, not only from his experience but also from the knowledge that he didn't stand alone. The drive to protect the innocent fueled him, lighting a path through the complexities of emotional turmoil. When he approached Captain Reynolds's office this time, he carried more than just evidence. He bore the weight of purpose. Jake knocked and entered, presenting his findings without airs of doubt or hesitance. "Captain, it's time to take this investigation seriously. We have enough evidence to act and unearth the network behind the impersonators." The captain's eyes sharpened as he absorbed the gravity of Jake's words. What once might have been dismissed as overzealousness now demanded attention. Jake could see it in the folds deepening around the captain's eyes. This was confirmation, not just of the imposter scheme, but of Jake's transformation into a diligent police officer, ready to confront the uncomfortable truths. "All right, let's go over this together," Reynolds said, sitting back in his chair with a newfound respect. No longer was Jake a mere cog in the bureaucratic machine. He had evolved into an agent of accountability. The planning sessions that followed united the precinct behind a shared goal, revealing the unity he thought lost, but merely dormant. Each officer brought their expertise to the table, a chorus of tactical voices melding into a determined force, ready to draw the lines against the criminals that operated under the guise of law enforcement. The culmination of Jake's efforts arrived on a crisp autumn morning, the air saturated with anticipation. Armed with warrants based on their findings, the team moved in synchronized steps toward the unsuspecting targets. Jake felt the steady beat of adrenaline in his chest as they entered. He could finally see justice unfolding like a well-designed blueprint, and in that moment, his personal evolution crystallized. He had weathered self-doubt, ethical malfunctions, and near isolation, only to find that justice had transformed, blossoming into something tactile and real. The families who had once suffered under the weight of deception were now on the cusp of restoration. He held the weight of their stories in his heart, a profound connection shared among victims turned advocates. As the operation unfolded, Jake's team emerged victorious, securing arrests that yielded convictions against the impersonators. Rays of hope flooded over the precinct as news traveled fast. The very air felt lighter, buoyed by a sense of recognition that was long overdue. The finality of victory brought a euphoric realization. The journey had merged his familial legacy, a relentless thirst for justice, and a profound personal transformation. Energy surged within him as he accepted commendations. He had achieved not only professional competency, but a solid confidence anchored deeply in ethical resolve. Jake Thompson now stood firmly at the nexus of power and responsibility, a protector of rights, a guardian of justice, armed with the knowledge that he could confront deception and emerge transformed. The badge that had once felt burdensome now radiated pride, a connection forged by adversity. He returned to the precinct floor where the joyful hubbub mirrored his own elation. As he moved among his colleagues, the shadows of doubt faded, replaced by camaraderie and respect. The lesson had solidified within him. True justice encompassed not only the law, but also the empathy woven into every heart each officer served. In that moment, Jake realized he had become the embodiment of hope for those who needed it most, paving the way to a future where justice would never feel distant again, and everyone could finally breathe a little easier. As this chapter of his life concluded with undeniable achievement, he felt the call of transformation resonate well beyond these precinct walls. You need to subscribe now to ensure you never miss another gripping story of personal growth and triumph. This is the moment to show your support. Leave a like now to help amplify these unbelievable tales and feed the algorithm's appetite. Comment below with your reactions and theories about Jake's incredible journey, and help us cultivate meaningful conversations. Share instantly this video with at least 5 friends who need to witness this powerful conclusion. Don't wait even one more second to spread the inspiration.